Hello, and welcome once again to another fun-filled heretical episode of Inside the World of Mack's Headroom. Today, I want to talk about the new Netflix docuseries called Filthy Rich, and then something to the effect of, Inside the Life of Jeffrey Epstein, or something to that effect. And I want to try to talk about it again from a little bit different perspective. If any of you saw my review on The Tiger King, I want to try to take the same sort of overlay and examine this other Netflix production, focusing on Netflix and their, as we say nowadays in hip language, controlling the narrative. But they do have, I'm beginning to notice, this wonderful way, not wonderful, but rather devious way of controlling the narrative. And it's beginning to irritate me a little bit. It did in the Joe Exotic Tiger King expose, whatever you want to call it. If you want to hear my comments on that, you can watch the other tape I did. But on this one, I saw very much the same sort of influence of the directorship and the production crew of the Netflix people, really sculpting this narrative into what I would consider a rather empty and kind of highly dramatized in certain ways, but very empty depiction of the Jeff Epstein story. And let me start out by saying that I've been a follower of this for a long, long time. Like even when he got busted the first time and, just got a light sentence, I was examining him then because I had been also hip to Jimmy Savile and had learned quite about him. And then I saw some references when I was reading about Jimmy Savile, about this guy Jeff Epstein, and I started following him. So I've been into this for a long time, and I've climbed down many, many rabbit holes related to Jeff Epstein. So I'm not saying that I'm some FBI agent who knows everything, but I think as an observer, and especially a systems thinker, and somewhat of a conspiracy theorist, I'm standing on pretty firm ground to make the comments that I want to make about this new docuseries, Filthy Rich. I started out by saying it's kind of empty. And the reason I say that is because if anybody knows anything about the Jeffrey Epstein narrative, there isn't much new that's uncovered, even though there is a lot of, quote, new material, which is being discussed all over the place. And it wasn't even entered into the equation in the Netflix interpretation of this. So basically, what you have in the Filthy Rich docuseries is just simply a recounting of everything you've heard, basically. If you just watch the news or seen any YouTube documentaries on the subject, anything, you're not going to hear a whole lot of new information. But instead, what you're going to see is the way Netflix stacks the deck, and how, just in my humble opinion, how they will, the old Marshall McLuhan expression, the medium is the message, how they control the medium to portray a certain picture, not that I'm saying is necessarily false, but it's maybe a little bit misleading. And also, before I go on into any more of the analysis, I'd also like you to just check out that I'm in no way defending a dude like Jeff Epstein. No way. So if I sound like I'm a little critical of how Netflix chose to put this in the lens of their camera, don't think I'm saying that Jeff Epstein's some innocent guy or anything like that. I'm not at all. He's a monster, and so is this whole web that's connected to him, only half of which was actually addressed by Netflix, which is one of my gripes about this particular exploration into his life or death. I just want to go on record as saying I'm not trying to defend Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not trying to even doubt many of the facts that they present, but it's the way they present them that really bothered me. And I'm going to try to tell you what those are, okay? So that's the angle I want. That's the point of view I want to take. How did Netflix control this narrative? And in the end, I have a little bit of a theory that actually a friend of mine shared with me, and good old KDF, and she's quite a conspiracy thinker, and she gave me up with a really good idea that I want to throw out at the end too. Just give her credit. But anyway, first of all, if you look at, I'm not even going to mention the characters other than perhaps Virginia Roberts Dufresne and also Maria Farmer. Those are the only two I really want to mention by name because you've probably seen a lot of them. The other folks, women, to me, I lump in kind of one sum, being victims to Jeff Epstein. Some of them served different roles, and some were more recruiters, and some were more victims, and this and that. But there's only two characters I really want to kind of focus on because they are portrayed, in my opinion, very differently on the Netflix documentary than you see on the news or on even what I would consider more reputable sources of media, like Sean Atwood, for instance, interviewed Maria Farmer for like 2.5 hours, which I'm going to get into. And it's an entirely different interview than what you see on Netflix. So let me get down to some of the notions. First of all, keep in mind that I'm a very visual person, so I think visually. I assess, I take in information in a visual way instead of like some people might use their ears more or might use their senses more to access information. I use my eyes a lot. So I pay attention to things visually oftentimes more than I do, like, say, words or what I hear. So with that in mind, the first thing I want to hit on is how they portrayed the various victims of Epstein to look. I think that they, on purpose, because I've seen these women interviewed before, okay, and I see what they look like. And then I see them on this Netflix documentary, and it's really a big change. Now, was the change manipulative to do anything worse to Epstein? Maybe, but so what? He's a bum and he's dead. It doesn't really matter. But let me just point out some things that I happen to see. And I don't mean to sound like I'm some sort of like, chauvinist pig, like I'm eyeballing these girls. It's not what it's about at all, But my eyes pay attention to certain things that I can't help. So, for instance, one thing I noticed was that some of the women had gained some weight over the years. Now, that also could be just coincidental. It also goes hand in hand with someone who's been sexually abused. It's a self-protective thing to make yourself unappealing, say, to men. Or if you get anorexic, it may be to make yourself unappealing in the same way, unsexual. So a number of these women have put on some weight. Okay, big deal. But here's my thing, is that if you look at the women, they all were dressed in shirts that accentuated their spare tire. And I couldn't understand that. I mean, I dress a little way to make my spare tire not look as spare, But I mean, they all seem to have, not all of them, because some of them were sort of on the skinny side, but the ones that had gained weight had all had their fat part, like, their tummies, like, put into clothes that made that part stick out. I think that's evident in the gal that has pink hair. I don't know what her name is. There's a couple of others. They also seem to show them all sleeveless, which made, their arms had grown. And so it made them look heavier again, which gave them more of like a worn out, maybe cheap sort of look, like wearing shirts that are too tight and they're like too fat to get in them. Now, that was just my opinion, okay? But, if you want to go a little further, you can look at the makeup, too. They look sort of pasty-faced, except the one redheaded gal who's like sort of the hero at the end. I didn't quite understand that part, but, she tries to swim away and she ends up escaping or something. I don't know. But anyway, she was very attractive and didn't look as worn as the others. For what reason, I don't know. But I've seen these other women in interviews on other stations, and they don't look so worn out. It reminded me in certain ways of I wish I could remember her name, but in the Joe Exotic, the Tiger King thing, the man, guy, gal, whatever you want to refer to, who lost his arm, his hand, and he was asked to be posed in front of a garbage dump to be interviewed, and he didn't really want to do it, but they kind of insisted. They did it to make it look like it's more trailer trashy looking, you know. It's the same sort of thing with the makeup. They seem to make these women look like haggard, worn out. Now, they may be. I'm not trying to say they weren't victimized and traumatized. Please don't take me wrong, but they made it look worse. Because I've seen the women interviewed before, and they look different. Now, the greatest example of that I'm going to focus on is Maria Farmer. I don't want to go into her story, because that's not the purpose of this video. It's not to analyze, the data so much, but it is to look at the process and how Netflix controlled this narrative to look a certain way. Is it right or wrong? I don't know. I'm not really getting into that. Just I noticed what they did, and I noticed what they did in Tiger King, and it's the same thing. And I noticed what they did in the same thing when they tried to do their interpretation of Freud. Oh my God, put a guy like me and try to swallow that thing about Freud and a murder mystery? That's a little out there, you know? They've done it to a number of movies. Same thing with, I think it's called The Takeoff on Hannibal Lecter, where it was like 10 seasons, worth of Hannibal Lecter carving up shit. It was the same thing. They took so much, what would you call it, literary license to distort the whole meaning of this. And I'm not saying they did that in the Jeff Epstein thing, but there's enough of it to leave me with a bad taste in my mouth. And in this case, I'm also talking about Maria Farmer, who, if you've seen her on any of the Sean Atwood interviews, she strikes me as one of the most bubbly, like innocently attractive, has the nicest smile. She has the most candid affect. She uses her hands a lot when she talks. She's just, I don't know, one of the most appealing people I've ever seen, especially who's been through such torment like that. But she was, and she's interviewed by Sean Atwood. Okay, great interviewer. He gives people a lot of space to be themselves, okay? But that's who she was. If you look at her in the Netflix thing, there's two major things about her that they do that just control the opinion you have of Maria Farmer. And that is, the first time you see her, and she's interviewed a couple times, but the first several times you'll see her interviewed, she's sitting on a stool. She's wearing, again, as I remember, it's short sleeves, so you can see their arms have gotten kind of heavy. But the worst part about it is her hair is like all tied up in a funny way, and it's separated in such a way that you can see gray, like roots coming out, and she's got one of those little like chopsticks like stuck in it, as I remember. But I mean, she looks haggard and worn out. She also wears glasses in real life, and they're I don't know, they sort of are part of her look. It's just kind of a look. It's appealing, and they asked her to take her glasses off. Well, she's an older woman. You get to see the bags under her eyes when the glasses are removed. It's just like the guy in Tiger King they asked him to take his teeth out to pose for something. I mean, that's a pretty indecent liberty to take on a person, ask him to take his teeth out. Well, in this case, they made her look worse. She and her affect is different. They must have told her. She's sitting with her hands folded most of the time like this. Like, they must have told her to do that, because I've seen her interviewed, and she's like this all over, and she's very bubbly. And here's this woman, very solemn, talking about what happened to her. I thought it was a great example of how a production company can control a narrative into making someone look worse in this case. Now, I'm not saying there's not a reason to make them look worse, other than it's not very honest. It's not very ethical. It's not really presenting the data the way it really is, because I've seen her in much more spontaneous situations, and she's really bubbly. And at the end of the series, they show her again. But this time, it's like at the end of the series, so they want to show like sort of like the levity of the emancipation of all these women who've been, abused and stuff. So they're trying to make the mood sort of upbeat. So they show another very quick picture of her, but she's got like this beautiful head of hair that she has like on the Sean Atwood interview, and she plays with it a lot. So it moves around, not sexy, nothing. It just moves around. It's a very nice part of her. At the end, she's doing this again, but when they focus on her hair's all tied up. You can see gray roots. It's all frizzy. She looks worn out. She's no glasses. obviously Netflix instructed her to do that, just like they instructed, I wish I could remember his name, but the person with no arm that was sat in front of a garbage dump, this angle, I'm not done yet, but this angle is not only my opinion. Just watch any of the interviews. Like, say there's a great interview with Patrick Bet-David, who interviews Doc Antle. And Doc Antle just says he had no idea what was going to happen. Like they just said one thing and they did another. And, so this is not just my opinion that they're a manipulative production company. They're into the bucks. In this case, I think in certain ways they wanted to overplay certain things but underplay other things, which I'll get to in a second, okay? Oh boy, 15 minutes already. All right, so another thing that I thought was really quite interesting about this is, a lot of the shots of Jeff Epstein were taking place during a deposition, okay? Now, being that I was a sex offender therapist, I got deposed all the time. And depositions are one of the worst experiences, if any of you have ever been through, because you can be divorced and be deposed. You can be deposed for a lot of reasons. But when you're deposed, it's like being in a courtroom without a jury and without a judge and just one lawyer, usually, maybe you'll have your own, just saying the most outrageous things to you with somebody recording everything, and you're under oath, and they're recording everything you say, hoping to bullbait you into saying something stupid or getting jarred, and then you make an incriminating statement that is then entered back into the trial at court. That's what happens in a deposition, okay? It's gathering, it's interrogating by the lawyers, actually. And so what they do is they try to get you off guard. So you could be asked a million questions that have almost nothing to do with what they're inquiring, just to get you off balance. So, for instance, with Jeff Epstein, I'm sure there were questions that were asked in that deposition like, have you ever had sex with an animal? Have you ever been attracted to sex with an animal? Have you ever masturbated to thoughts of a goat? I mean, they might ask crazy questions just to get the guy riled up, okay? So what do you think one of the questions they asked during the deposition, which Netflix just happens to catch? Weren't you lovers with Les Wexner? Now, Netflix chooses to show that little segment, and what does Jeff Epstein do? He acts like he usually does, stupid and arrogant, and he goes, something like, what the fuck, and takes the thing, are we through, and he wants to get off. That doesn't mean they were lovers. But what Netflix chose to do was take a random question out of probably 50 other stupid random questions that are just geared to get you knocked off balance. You see, because during a deposition, even though you may have a lawyer present, the lawyer can say, I object to that question, and all they do is go, noted. In other words, it has to go to the judge to see whether the question actually can be entered in as evidence. So while the deposition's going on, they just keep going. It's like a free-for-all. It's worse than Perry Mason. I mean, it's terrible. I've been in many depositions when your client turns against you, and says, whatever. And so it happens with treating sex offenders. I guess wonder why. But, it happens a lot with sex offender therapy. You get deposed because they say you did something wrong to a guy who wants to get off somehow. And so I've been deposed a million times, and I've been asked questions like that. So I know they're trying to throw you off because there's nobody to stop it. There's no judge to say sustained or overruled. So what does Netflix do? They pull out this one little piece of a question that was probably one of 50 of like that to get you geared up and ask, the question of, weren't you lovers with Les Wexner? But then that goes on a Netflix thing that reaches a million people. Now all of a sudden people are going to start getting suspicious. Or does it even matter if he was lovers with Les Wexner? Does it really matter? They were fucking child traffickers and pedophiles. Where does being bisexual lovers have anything to do with it? It didn't. That's why it was asked in a deposition, but Netflix chooses to select that piece of deposition material to show in the movie, like to plant suspicion in your head. Great move, Netflix. Here's another one. The trailer park. Now, I'm familiar with the trailer park area. I had a girlfriend who grew up in West Palm Beach, Florida when I was like a freshman in college who had left under not the greatest circumstances to come to Tucson like many kids did who were running away from home. So I'm just kind of familiar with that area. The thing is, when they drive into the trailer park, what they show looks like worse than like the Philippines. I mean, it looks terrible. Now, my question is, if I took my car and I drove around in that neighborhood, maybe I'd find a few houses like that. But is that really representative of the population? Is that really a true representation of what that whole trailer park area is? Yes, he picked on vulnerable kids. I'm not trying to let him off on that. He was an asshole, okay? But did all those girls that came from that area come from such depleted neighborhoods such as that they showed on the Netflix? I don't think so. I don't think the girl I dated came from that bad of a place. I don't think so. Was it not the greatest? No, I don't think it was. But I don't think that's the case. So here again, they choose to show a select bit of tape. Just like the Les Wexner question, right, in the deposition. Oh, this is where they took the kids from. I'm not sure it was that bad. They might have been very bad off. Don't get me wrong. But were they like horrible, like living in the Philippines? That's what it looks like in the movie. So anyway, that's another thing I have where they were controlling the narrative. The thing that I have the biggest issue with, and I'm going to try to wrap up, is it's what they didn't address. You see, Netflix had a choice of what to pull into the narrative and what to leave out. What they left out was the most cutting-edge issues of the whole Epstein narrative. And that is that Jeff Epstein was like a paper tiger. He was like a front man. And they make suspicions like, oh, the FBI didn't really help. It just fell on deaf ears. No. Just watch Whitney Webb. Just watch, even though this guy is labeled in the media as an anti-Semite, and I'm Jewish, okay, so I'm going to be sensitive to that, but I've heard this guy Ryan Dawson talk, who is like an encyclopedia of all kinds of Israeli intelligence stuff that is kind of common knowledge if you just dig deep enough, that had to do with Ghislaine Maxwell and her father, and they kind of pulled Epstein into this, and then Les Wexner. It's a whole group of primarily, unfortunately, and I guess, Jewish, very wealthy people, like this, like a subsystem of the ruling class, as David Icke or any of these other people would talk about, Mack, the ruling class, and they're Jewish, and you see the stuff that's making like the big headlines. If you just pay attention to this whole issue with just a fair amount of diligence, you'll see that there's a whole conspiracy that says, I don't think it's such a conspiracy, that actually Epstein's concerns with universities like Harvard and all that stuff and they didn't even go really into that much, except he was an ex-teacher or something. But really what they were doing was they were working, according to many reputable people, Whitney Webb is one, and Ryan Dawson is another, even though people call him an anti-Semite. I don't know. I'll give him a break because he's pretty knowledgeable. They say that Epstein was part with Maxwell and Maxwell's father, I think Robert Maxwell, who was one of the biggest asshole ripoffs in the world, were all part of this kind of Zionist thing that connects Israel, and that they're actually sort of like spies of sorts. And they are a member of this group of elites. And one of the reasons Jeffrey Epstein was so fascinated with Harvard and stuff was they were trying to connect with the universities in order to extract information to give to Israel about stuff that they didn't know about, because, a lot of research in a lot of different departments goes on in university settings. So, that, and you just watch Eric Weinstein talk about academia and how it gets manipulated. So they left out, the most important part about how they controlled the narrative is that they left out a very important part. Now, maybe it's politically incorrect, but they fuck around with a lot of politically incorrect stuff. So why in this case would they leave out all this cutting edge material? Because they did the documentary so many months ago that they can't keep up with the current shit? I don't think so, because it ain't that current. They've been talking about this kind of stuff for a long time. No, they'd rather talk about Prince Andrew. No, they'd rather talk about everything that everybody knows and just make it more dramatic. Make the girls look more haggard, make the neighborhood they came from look shittier, make Maria Farmer look like this depressed old lady when really she's a very vibrant person, survivor. It gets crazy. And what they leave out in controlling the narrative is just as important. It's the negative space. If you think about art, that it's the negative space. what they leave out is a big picture. You see, what's not there creates a picture. And that picture is this whole conspiracy having to do with Israel, the United States, and this kind of subsystem of a ruling class of very rich, unfortunately, in my case, Jewish Zionist people who are all sort of connected in a triangle. The USA, Israel, and Jeff Epstein. And there's a lot of nasty things that are said about Israel, and it's a very hard pill for me to swallow, being Jewish, okay? But why is Israel any different than anywhere else? If there's pedophilia going on in England with Jimmy Savile, you know, he died in what, 82? Why? What, Israel don't have that going on? Give me a break. The United States doesn't somehow complicit or explicitly try to get involved with child trafficking? Oh, please, America the Beautiful, right? Yeah, the beautiful 12-year-old girl. Yeah, sometimes. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little ranty, and it's getting a little long, but the point I'm trying to make is that Netflix controlled this narrative in two ways, in positive space and in negative space. Positive space, what they did was they accentuated certain parts that they wanted to make the victims look sort of worse than they are as survivors, okay? And they made the trailer park possibly, I don't think that trailer, I was never there, but I'll bet you if you go driving in there, they probably took the worst shots of it. Just like they took the worst place that they could have stuck the poor gal who lost her arm, or guy who lost his arm, in front of a garbage dump. I mean, and so at the positive, not positive, but I mean, if you use artistic words, positive space that paints the picture, they told us everything that we know, and just schmaltzed it up, except for the Les Wexner thing, which I just got a major kick out of, I mean, I've been deposed. I know how many stupid questions they throw at you just to get you rattled. Look, it got him rattled. I think he took his microphone off. But it also, at the level of negative space, there's a lot they didn't tell you. Now, conclusion, I'm getting long. My friend Katie, she's got quite a head on her shoulders, and we were talking. And she says she was in the midst of watching it too. And she said, you know what? She said, I got a feeling the reason they didn't mention any of that shit is because Netflix is in on it. The Netflix is part of the government, the government cover-up to make why it's so hard to find Ghislaine Maxwell. She was saying that, well, maybe Netflix is all part of this. Who knows? Maybe this whole thing that everybody's going to be watching now contains us to get fascinated by the narrative as defined by the positive space, as defined by what Netflix showed us, and diverting us from what they don't show us, that all you got to do is watch other stations like Sean Atwood, and you're going to see this stuff, exposed. So isn't it interesting if you're getting into conspiracies and you're going to start thinking, well, Epstein wasn't just Epstein, maybe Epstein was Clinton. That's another one about the Netflix. I got to throw it in. They say about this. Oh, what came out in the Netflix thing was for the second time we have a witness that saw Bill Clinton in Epstein's with girls, or some kind of bullshit like that. There's a flight record with 26 flights he went to Epstein Island for. What do you go to Epstein Island for? You sure don't go for a cocktail and dinner. Give me a break, So, I mean, that was polite. Oh, I'm very proud of myself. I could have really gone off. Good super ego, Mack. So, anyway, I just want to say that I think, again, Netflix has done a disservice, as I think they did to Tiger Joe. I think they did a disservice to the whole Epstein thing, and may have even gotten people who might have been interested in looking deeper in the rabbit hole into this conspiracy, got them away from looking at that and just focusing on these parts that they wanted to accentuate. Ooh, maybe he was lovers with Les Wexner. What the fuck does that have to do with the price of tea and, I can't say the word, wherever? I mean, please. That was a bogus question that was thrown at him in a deposition. That's all. So I guess that's it. I hope I got through to you. I'm really big on how media controls things, and I'm getting more and more into it, boy. I mean, I may do a thing about like mainstream media, because you just can't trust anything. But I think my friend Katie had a really good point, that maybe Netflix is even part of this, and that's why this is coming out. and maybe it helps us keep things toned down. Because it does, even though it makes the victims look worse, and it makes Jeff Epstein look kind of like more like a monster, what it does do is it kind of quells, it just kind of casts suspicion on the FBI. Oh, they didn't do what they should have. They haven't done what they should have a jillion times. It's no new news, you know? So maybe there's a purpose for that. And with that, I bid you adieu. So thank you once again for being with me for another fun-filled, heretical episode of Inside the World of Mack's Headroom. I haven't fucked this up in about 3 times. This might be a good tape. Thank you.